to today's webinar. My name is Gavin Hinks, a writer with ACCA's Accounting and Business magazine. Today we'll be hearing a beginner's guide to AI, artificial intelligence, and how it helps accountancy and bookkeeping. Joining me to lend their experience, insight, and knowledge is Rory McMahon, a product specialist with AutoEntry. He's an expert in helping accountants streamline their processes using technology. Before we start, I need to run through some housekeeping. The presentation is accompanied by slides that automatically change as our speaker presents. If you find they aren't progressing for you, you might want to refresh your browser. PC users, it's F5, and for Mac users, it's Command R. You can access the slides from the resources area. We'd love to see your questions, which you can send us using the chat area on your screens. We'll go through those in a Q&A at the end of the presentation. You can also enlarge the slide area of your screen by grabbing and dragging the bottom right-hand corner of the slide area window. There's also a help button if you have problems with the technology. The whole webinar will last about an hour. Before we move on, though, a note about CPD. If you're an ACCA member, you can count this webinar towards your CPD. If it's relevant to your career, you can apply the learning in the workplace and provide evidence you've joined us today. For that evidence, we offer a personalized CPD certificate, which you can access via a certificate icon in the middle of the tray at the bottom of the screen. That's it for the introduction. It's now time to hear from our speaker. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just as to reiterate the point there, as I said, if there are any questions, I do have a colleague in the Q&A section who will be in there, and then we'll also have that time at the end to kind of go through it. So this is a beginner's guide to AI for accountancy and bookkeeping. Just before we kind of get into kind of more formal introductions, I just figured we'd start off with a poll just to get things started. So just be interested to hear right now from everyone attending is, are you actually already using artificial intelligence in your work that you're aware of? So if so, please utilize this opportunity now. If you can just choose one of the options there if you are, if you're not, or even if you're just not sure, because you never know, some of the tools you're already using might already be available for you there. So just going to give it a minute or so just to let the queries come in. So yeah, if just take the moment, have a look. Maybe there, as I say, there could be tools you already have that are using it without your knowledge. So if you aren't sure, of course, use that option C. But if you're ahead of the game, if you feel like you are, then of course you've got that option A just there. So just going to give it a few more seconds just to let a few more queries pop in. And then it'd be interesting to look at the results as we move forward. Cool. So there's just as I was kind of expecting. I do a lot of these kind of talks. And I meet a lot of people when I'm out and about at events, whether that be at different kind of trade shows like Accountex last week. And it's exactly the same kind of results I was expecting that I've had the conversations about. So with that, I can see a lot of people already are using it. But majority of you there, 54.1%, saying no, I don't, which is okay. Maybe today might enlighten you to maybe make that step into how you can utilize it, or you might even change your answer if you were to revisit this poll, because some of the tools you're already using might already be using it without your knowledge. So yeah, and then again, just going to move on, and then as I say, we'll do a bit more of the introductions, and then we'll start all the way from day one of AI and then how we're impacting the industry with it. So I'm Rory McMahon. I've been working at AutoEntry for quite a few years now, coming up to 7. So nearly from day one of AutoEntry as a product within itself, and that's before it was acquired by Sage. What I've been doing during that period is my role is to kind of help new kind of up and coming practices, as well as old established ones, kind of embrace technology, how they can make that kind of leap into the tech space, how they can utilize different apps within the service, even outside of AutoEntry as a solution itself. So one of my greatest passions as well is kind of utilizing tech within the kind of finance accounting industry. So it's an honor to actually have this opportunity to chat with yourselves today as well. It's also worth noting, even though I'm kind of the host the grandmaster here today talking about artificial intelligence, but by no means am I going to be the 100% expert in this scenario. I've had the privilege of kind of coordinating this presentation with some of my colleagues as well from a very tech-minded perspective. So we've got a broad different kind of scale of input into this presentation to assist, and also kind of pull in different factors of different variables we might not have considered. So that's myself and about AutoEntry, my journey there so far. And then we'll revisit some of those topics a bit more later down the line. But I think the first thing we need to clarify today is actually what is artificial intelligence. So we're going to stick to the context of using it within accounting and bookkeeping, of course, when answering this question. But I have popped up on the screen there just the general definition you can find within the Oxford English Dictionary. But overall, it is pretty simple. AI is when computers do sophisticated tasks normally requiring humans. So often they do this in human-like ways, which in certain cases can seem a little bit spooky. But AI isn't actually new, and history always shows us it's best when augmenting humans, not actually replacing them. Steve Jobs, the guy who founded Apple, of course, he actually called computers bicycles for the mind, which is quite a great analogy. It's the perfect description, essentially, because a human would still need to actually turn those pedals and steer the bike. But if you're riding a bike, you will generally move faster and further than you could if you were walking or even running. So can computers think? No. This is still not the case, and it's unlikely to be the case for decades, despite all the breakthroughs we've recently been seeing, but we're still not closer to making that computer think like a human can. But what computers can do is they can actually work out what's likely to be the correct answer. And that's where we've kind of recently been seeing the big breakthroughs have been recently with things like ChatGPT is kind of the talk of the town at the minute. And you can actually ask ChatGPT how it's feeling today. And it will actually tell you, but it does not think when you ask it how it is actually feeling today. It can work out what the most likely best answer is based on what millions of people have said in the past in answer to that question. And when it tells you that it feels fine and enjoying the weather today, it is very convincing, but it's still not actually artificially intelligent. It doesn't feel fine because it doesn't feel anything. It's just been able to work out the best answer. And if this happens enough times, you've got something that is spookily like a human. In this kind of chat and this webinar today, we all work with numbers somewhat here. So here's something and I've definitely been using this. You can slip into conversation at dinner parties or at the pub just to sound that little bit more intelligent. But it also might help unlock AI for you. Artificial intelligence is actually a very bad way of describing this technology in theory, because several scientists have suggested that high-level applied statistics is actually better. All of this is just weighing up a lot of probabilities. And it has always been. The more powerful computers get, the more probabilities they can weigh up in a reasonable time frame using larger and larger amounts of data, ensuring it's getting faster and faster. So the better artificial intelligence does generally become. And that's also a description of machine learning, which is the technology that powers pretty much all modern AI and has done for a couple of decades now, believe it or not. Because machine learning examines huge amounts of existing data to produce what's most statistically likely to be the answer. And really, that's not much different to humans. If I showed you a red round thing today, threw it on the floor and it bounced back up, you turn around and you tell me that it's a ball. And you're basing that on the many previous balls you've seen within your lifetime. Unless you lived a very sheltered childhood and you've never seen a ball before, you wouldn't have a clue. And that's just exactly the same principle as what artificial intelligence is. You can't do anything if you don't have the initial data to work with. AutoEntry, for example, has machine learning built into it, as does the groundbreaking tools like ChatGPT. It's all about analyzing and deciding what's most likely to be correct. So let's actually take a look all the way back at the history of AI and doing this kind of research. And this is where a lot of my colleagues' input came in, of vast experiences of using different technology throughout the years. And it's fascinating to see, really, because the initial concept of AI is actually believed to have kind of been around since ancient Greek times, believe it or not. But it wasn't until the early 20th century that we started to think up the actual methods and techniques through which artificial intelligence could be implemented. Alan Turing, probably not a name most people would expect to hear on this topic at this kind of early stage on. But Alan Turing, known primarily as the World War II code breaker and the father of modern computing, he obviously suggested the Turing test. Basically, he suggested that if somebody chatted to both a computer and a human at the same time and couldn't tell them apart, then computers had achieved true intelligence. Has the Turing test been passed in that kind of sense? Well, yes, you can argue it has, because ChatGPT will do a very good job of pretending to be human. Actually, most recently, quite an interesting topic. I don't know if people have seen this. One of Google's engineers recently was in the news when he declared Google's Lambda chatbot was sentient, which of course is kind of referring to that actually they have emotion, they have feeling. And that's not correct. That wasn't the case, which is kind of where the outroar is kind of broken out in that sense. But that just shows how good these things have become. Some of us who have been using computers for some time, you might remember ELIZA and programs like it. Even back in the 60s, computers could do a really good imitation of humans by simply turning what we said into questions. So if you told ELIZA that you were feeling depressed, she would instantly kind of fire back and say, "Why are you feeling depressed?" And you could then kind of respond back saying, it could be the rain outside's getting you down. And then Eliza would respond, "Why does the rain outside get you down?" And this could continue for many, many hours. And of course, some people will find that interaction very therapeutic. It was actually in 1997 that arguably the biggest AI milestone arrived when IBM launched the Big Blue computer, and it beat the world kind of chess champion. Chess, of course, is ultimately a game regarding kind of different moves and plays within it. Put simply, Big Blue knew more of these and could actually calculate around 200 million possible moves per second, which as a human, of course, that's just impossible to think up. So not even kind of chess grandmasters who know the game inside out. This ultimately, they couldn't kind of think of that. So this ultimately is what powers modern AI, a huge amount of computing power. And this is kind of next part is probably getting a bit more into modern times, especially with kind of the launch of kind of what Tesla are up to these days. But before that, the US government defense body, DARPA, wanted to find if vehicles could drive themselves. And in 2004, it first created the grand challenge of driving 100 kilometers through the Nevada desert. And it was just a year later that 5 cars did it. I mean, nowadays, we're tantalizingly close to cars that can drive themselves. Of course, as I mentioned, we've seen this in the US with some cars, with Tesla, but they're not 100% reliable. So that's why they've kind of not made that step where it's a common part of society. So if anything, it's actually a bit more of a gimmick right now, in my opinion. In 2011, AI arrived in our pockets on our smartphones, especially with the introduction of Siri. And this is just a mashup of various technologies, such as speech recognition and something that wasn't much more sophisticated than ELIZA, essentially. Because what it was doing, it was just spotting keywords and sentences we say. But it was a pretty impressive trick, don't get me wrong. And nowadays, you can ask Alexa, for example, some complex questions and get the correct answers. And apologies if I set anyone's off by saying that. But now let's bring us up to today and kind of what we've kind of definitely been seeing. And I'm seeing kind of a running kind of trend on LinkedIn, especially what people are talking about. And I've already mentioned it a fair few times. These two main types of AI that just seem to have come out of nowhere. ChatGPT, of course, that could understand questions and provide perfect answers. And tools like Midjourney, which is essentially the same, but it's about creating incredible artwork pieces. And what those are called is generative AI, in that it generates useful output. And I will come back to that a little later on, but just beforehand, let's just kind of talk about an initial intro and then kind of relating this back into the accounting industry. So, of course, working at AutoEntry for as long as I have, I'm going to start off with this being the first example I use. So let's start the examination of AI with AutoEntry. So as it happens, it allows me to give the perfect introduction because you can see on my screen, there's different kind of documents there and different data for the software to extract. So what AutoEntry is designed to do, if you're not familiar already, is to extract data from receipts, invoices, and statements, and then pass that data through to accounting software. The idea of this is to save up to 90% of time, and it does do that. And it also, compared to manually typing up the data, it will provide 99% accuracy as well. Of course, we as humans, we can read the financial paperwork pretty well, but for computers, it is very, very hard. Because firstly, they have to be able to identify printed characters and numbers, and given the wide variety of fonts used today, that's a hurdle within itself. Plus, we've all probably seen it firsthand, paperwork can be badly printed, or it can be scrumpled up, whatever the scenario could be. So we use optical character recognition, and it's actually very, very accurate these days. But that's the extraction, right? But what we actually have to do here is we have to understand what the data actually is and what it actually means. So, for example, on a bank statement, you and I can easily identify where the account number is located on the page. I can teach the computer this, it's at the top right. So if the computer gets another statement from the same bank, then it will know where the account number is. Great, perfect. It's kind of done that job. But of course, that's just for that one bank and that one statement. So we need to counter the fact that there are many different banks and all of them are going to use different layouts of statements. So the other important data on the page might appear in different places too, different fonts, of course, to use. So again, for a standard computer, this is essentially going to cause utter chaos. We cannot teach the computer how to recognize the layout of every single bank statement in the world. It's pretty much impossible. Plus, even if we were to achieve that feat, as soon as we'd finished that task, probably 9 times out of 10, a few of the banks would have redesigned their statements, changed the fonts, changed the layout, whatever the scenario. So we also, for that, have to use machine learning. So we have to teach the computer so it can learn all by itself. Machine learning works by giving weight to the data using various clues on the page. We had to train the machine learning model for AutoEntry, and that took months, and it's still ongoing to this day. Plus, also it used different types of resources, pages and pages of different invoices, receipts, statements. And as I said, we're continuously doing that day in, day out. But because of this, we've achieved a very high degree of accuracy. What we weren't doing, so we weren't teaching it about the layout of these documents. We were teaching it how to identify meaning. We were teaching it what the text on an invoice or a receipt or a statement actually means, so it can identify that a series of numbers is a date. It doesn't matter where that date appears on the page or the font used. It doesn't matter how the date is written or a word and so forth. The computer learns all of this in a way that we take for granted as humans. And that's why we call this artificial intelligence. It's learned the weight or importance of a certain set of numbers or words. Using this means the machine learning can determine what a nominal code looks like, for example, or a total amount, or perhaps even just a page number. In the example here, as I mentioned on the page, we might determine that the number is a date from a first glance, but just like machine learning, we'd be looking to test that by looking at the document. We know dates usually appear at the top of statements, for example. Sometimes the date is in a different font, so it's obvious what it actually is. But as you can see in this example, what we initially thought was a date is actually an account number here in the top right. So how do we know that? Well, what we can also see here is just beneath that, there's a sort code and there's a BIC number, there's an IBAN number. So, and we typically know that account numbers are predominantly going to be 8 digits. And just like machine learning, we use those clues to give weight to the decision. So that way it knows what it's pulling out. If it's not 100% sure, obviously that's going to be another topic to discuss, especially with AI. If it's not 100% sure, what we might then do is we typically would ask for a second opinion. And what that second opinion would look like is a human. So when we're asking that opinion, if the machine learning process is not 100% sure, the human can then kind of interact and step in. And often this would happen because a document is poorly printed, again, going back to those examples, and the numbers and letters are generally hard to read. And this check-in is very kind of simple and fast to do. And then it allows it to happen in real time as well. So then that's why we can state that it's going to be 99% accurate. So once we've got the data into AutoEntry from the receipt, invoice, or statement, whatever the document is, we then need to categorize it before publishing it through to the ledger in our accounting software. This isn't time consuming, but once again, the AutoEntry computer wants to automate that by using AI. And when you set up AutoEntry, you can connect it with your accounting software, whether that's Xero, Sage, QuickBooks, or whatever other major accounting software. What the integration is doing is it's pulling in the supplier and customer account details. so that when it encounters data you've extracted that looks likely to be a match, it will suggest that so you don't have to hunt through lists to find it. You can then create rules based on this so that effectively it's becoming a hands-free process in future. And because of this, you can essentially automate the entire process so that all you need to do is take a snap of the paperwork or scan it through the accounting software automatically, even email it in is probably the most popular one these days. And that's by simply using a personal email address. But the key thing is that the entire process will be automated. So where do we also find AI in accounting and bookkeeping tasks? I'm just going to kind of move slightly out of auto entry as well, kind of moving forward. So again, I'm going back to the first kind of poll, and people aren't answering saying they're not sure, or even where they're saying no, they're not using it. This is where you might start realizing you are using it, or maybe we're not utilizing it enough. So one of the most consuming tasks is the periodic bank reconciliation. And of course, this is one of the main reasons many of us switched to accounting software in the first place over the years. And just like with auto entry, we need to match receipt and invoice data to the ledger with also what the bank shows. When it comes to bank rec, this demonstrates another key requirement of artificial intelligence, because that's providing access to data and lots of it as well. So in this case, we're talking about banking data, and we can get this by using open banking / bank feeds. And this is where, amongst other things, we can connect accounting software to the bank to download transaction data and also get that information again in real time. So that's going to rapidly speed up the reconciliation when we do it. And it also empowers machine learning and AI, which can step in when there are unknown transactions. And that will then also allow you to attempt to reconcile them without a human input. If any of this does sound kind of new and exotic to anyone, I would heavily suggest have a chat with your accounting software support line and discuss it, because much of this is mature technology these days. So it should be a basic building block to the technology you're currently using, because account apps are increasingly in corporate reporting. And so accounting apps increasingly incorporate reporting and forecasting, which is powered by AI. And again, I'll come back to that topic in a moment and kind of share some other apps that might be worth kind of investigating and looking into. So far, I appreciate it's a lot of information to take in at this stage with AI and how it kind of already works and the history of it. So let's kind of strip back and kind of figure out what we've kind of covered so far and what we've learned at this stage. So in accounting and bookkeeping, AI is nearly always about automating repetitive tasks and processes. And there is a difference between a task and a process. A task might be a one-off thing taking minutes, but a process could be an hour or two's work for a human. AI is increasingly about automating those full processes, trimming a lot of time off a human's daily work. It's often invisible and in the background. So again, referencing back to the poll where people weren't sure if they're using it, because artificial intelligence never has a big red box alongside it, kind of highlighting, hello, this is artificial intelligence, giving you that nudge. So it is seamlessly running in the background. To get AI, nearly always, you're going to actually have to move more actually into your and beyond your basic accounting app, like Xero, like Sage, like QuickBooks, because they are increasingly involving more and more AI nowadays. But apps actually focus on specific tasks and can be laser-like in applying AI to make your life easier. One of the main kind of topics that's been ongoing for a few years within this sector is the recruitment crisis in accounting. It's not something I imagine a lot of people aren't disfamiliar with. And experts already kind of point out that AI provides one solution to increasing capacity for yourself and your current team, short of actually having to employ more and more people, which research shows is the last option practices consider, given current trading conditions and that recruitment crisis, of course. Because when AI is successfully deployed, people often say it's kind of like having an extra member of staff, but without the cost attached. And we can even be as cheesy to say they're never going to take a day of annual leave or request holiday or pull a sickie. So it is kind of having that additional employee there to hand. The practical realities of this for accountants and bookkeepers, and these are going to apply to everyone differently. I'm not saying all of these are going to be relevant to yourself, but these are just kind of some of the realities people can consider when using AI tools. And what those kind of additional services or offerings can be is you can learn to offer different services in your practice, maybe enhance what you're kind of doing for your clients. So by maybe shifting to an advisory piece and use that time to take more interest in your client's business and aim to be the partner they deserve. You're just getting away from the grind of tasks, really, like compliance, for example. Alternatively, some people might not want to increase their service or increase their capacity, and that's okay. So you might utilize AI to kind of improve your work-life balance, and that could also be a great outcome. So it's time to take kind of the AI kind of briefing aside and explain what an app stack is, because again, this is going to kind of help people be aware of maybe what they're currently using is a bit more intelligent than what they might be utilizing it for, but also just maybe educate those who aren't familiar with an app stack or a tech stack, however you want to reference it, because this is generally how you're going to start getting AI into your practice. So you can speak to many kind of successful accountants, or if you meet at events, things like that, and 9 times out of 10, they would generally have a personalized app stack that they've researched and implemented. And that's what drives their business forward. I'm not saying their app stack is going to be 100% going to be what you're going to need, because it's always going to vary client by client. So there's going to be different kind of aspects that we need to understand. So we already know about apps on mobile phones, of course, by using everyone pretty much these days have a smartphone. So if you wanted to use Facebook on your mobile, you have to install the Facebook app, right, to access it on your iPhone or your Android. In the world of accounting, there's also apps as well, but these are built on the foundation of your accounting software. So in the example I've got on the screen here, we've got Xero as the focus, but all the major accounting packages also have their own app stores built in as well. So you can see these different suppliers coming out there. So you've got AutoEntry, you've got Chaser, GoCardless, things like that. They're all kind of spawning out from Xero. And typically these app stores are going to provide you with cloud-based solutions. So data flows effortlessly between apps and services, safely and securely, bear in mind. And this means you can, of course, integrate and connect the apps together, which is where the power predominantly is going to lie. Both accountants, bookkeepers, and clients can actually have their own app stacks, but often the power comes when integrating your apps with those of your clients, and it also advising on the app stacks too. As I mentioned, it's about the relevance for the different clients and what their circumstances are. Apps also, bear in mind, target any area you work in: compliance, bookkeeping, payroll, reporting, auditing, funding, etc. There's a whole long list. So generally, savvy accountants, bookkeepers also expand their app stack in areas like marketing as well. Essentially, app stores are treasure troves to be raided. They are a gold mine in there, and are typically how many people start building their apps out. And by using that, you can see different reviews and how people are using them. And that's a really powerful way to kind of build your pick and mix from different software vendors too. And of course, again, bear in mind, a lot of these are going to be ledger agnostic. So they will work with various different examples. So of course, I mentioned we've got Xero here, but this could also be QuickBooks, Sage, even those clients that you onboard who are utilizing Free Agent, for example. And lastly, just the last point on this slide, it's important to understand that although I'm kind of referring to apps and the App Store on a regular basis here, but sometimes these apps might not actually be a physical app on the mobile phone. We could be referring to an online service, which might not be, as I say, a physical app. It could just be something in the cloud, but you can still integrate it into, even if you have to log in through a different web browser. Cool. So outside of accessing AI and automation, there's some other really important reasons why you should be utilizing an app stack if you aren't already. Connectivity with clients. That basically just means you can move data instantly and seamlessly between yourself and clients. For example, just a year or two ago, many accountants, I'm sure a lot of you have been a part of this as well. I know it's probably not the words you want to hear, but COVID times I'm going to reference here. So just over that kind of couple of years ago, many accountants, they were being asked to create COVID funding applications for the clients to get government assistance, of course. The cloud made getting this data and creating reports from it incredibly easy. Otherwise, if you weren't doing that, it was a case of emailing the data back and forth, or even worse, I still hear nightmare stories about people who were still posting around the printed copies. So introduce efficiencies into core processes. We're not introducing technology for technology's sake by any means. As I've already mentioned, all the top apps are built around some kind of automation. They take away the drudge tasks that most of us hate doing. I mean, this has a useful side effect when it comes to recruitment too, because it's no longer a case of dropping all that drudge work on like a new junior employee, and then therefore they're going to become dissatisfied and decrease your employee retention perhaps. Instead, people can join your business and become more productive, useful, and generally through that, people are going to start feeling more valued. And that's very crucial, as I've just mentioned beforehand, about the current recruitment crisis. So enough topic on the recruitment crisis. Is not what we're here to discuss today. So we'll move up to kind of freeing up your time as well to make that better use for your experience as well as an individual. So as I just mentioned, without those drudge tasks, everything from inputting data from receipts to chasing late payments, you're actually then freed up to take more time, whether that be with your clients on a more of an advisory role. And that again can improve your service offering propositions. You can get closer to your clients, be of better use to them. And then in turn, if you're offering them more kind of services and kind of building that relationship, it makes your life a lot easier to then start considering increasing fees based on the useful insights you're providing them. And this is all without the client becoming concerned about fees they're paying as well, because again, they're going to start seeing the value you're offering them. And I say that's about kind of your growth as a practice. Not everyone sees kind of success as that kind of building a larger practice. Some people might want to use that to free up time. So I know a lot of people might want to kind of spend that time just walking the dog a bit more, or picking the kids up from school. So app stacks, again, in turn, are going to help free up that ambition too. There, of course, are going to be collateral benefits. You present as first as digital first. And this kind of next example I'm going to use, this was kind of really fascinating about the research on this, because it's not something I've really considered too much, even though I've kind of, over the last kind of 7 years, been to kind of hundreds and hundreds of events, and I've seen different types of people utilizing different softwares in this space. But let's kind of talk about the clients' businesses who we're servicing, right? And again, I'm sorry to anyone, this might make them seem a bit old, but I don't think a lot of people are aware that the Gen Z generation, their oldest person is now actually 26 years old. The oldest member of the millennial generation is 42 years old. So these people were brought up on technology. So research shows that members of the Gen Z generation got their first smartphone before their 12th birthday, which to me is crazy and alien. And these people are the people nowadays starting businesses. They're the ones that we are now going to need to start matching their expectations by offering a more digital first practice. So where else is AI found in the world of accounting and bookkeeping? Here's some other examples. I know I've kind of dragged on about AutoEntry quite a bit. So I think now it's kind of a good opportunity to kind of introduce you to other things outside. So of course, as I say, we do it here at AutoEntry in terms of recognition of kind of handwriting. Handwriting generally can be somewhat hard, but a lot of us these days might have seen that banking apps have also got the capacity to do so with scanning in a check, without the need of actually having to go into the bank or risk posting them off. So that's a huge time saver in itself. A new product that's kind of coming out, I don't think a lot of people are going to be aware of this one. The Sage Inbox is a new product, and it's slowly becoming available now for sign up, and it's still in testing, but the idea of it is going to help connect your team's email inbox to your accounting software. And right now it's mostly about organizing the accounting components of your inbox and providing quick access to things like AP and AR elements. But in future, it will allow automation based around AI, including things like automatically responding to emails, assigning tasks to relevant staff members, and so forth. It's a very exciting piece of kit. It's definitely worth looking into. On the kind of the topic of Sage, I don't know if some of you would have seen this in the past. I mean, some of you might still kind of be aware of it. Sage created a chatbot called Peg. It's still around more or less. There are parts of it in Sage's Intact product, for example, but in its original form, you spoke to Peg through Facebook Messenger. And just like speaking to anybody, you could tell it things like, I spent £3.50 buying a coffee. It would then make a note of that ledger in your account and in your accounting software it's connected to. And that sounds simple, but think about actually what was on offer. It's a way for clients to do their actual own accounting without even understanding what a ledger actually is. So, alas, of course, PEG has kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit in recent years, but I wouldn't be surprised to kind of find it coming back to life at some point in the near future. And then we've got apps as well, like MindBridge. The idea of that is it's constantly scanning business financial records to identify patterns in the ledger. So like that in the ledger, payable, receivable, revenue, vendor activity. And unlike traditional audits, which work with just a sample of data, it works across all of the data all of the time. And then, of course, reporting and dashboards, there are also apps like Futurely, which are able to forecast out to 3 years of businesses' profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flow. So it's a very clever piece of tech as well. And that can be a game changer if you are looking to introduce more advisory services. Now, I mean, this is kind of the part I think a lot more people are expecting to hear more in depth about ChatGPT. And especially when I was at Accountex North last week, I've definitely having some great conversations with people of how they've actually started using ChatGPT within their practice. And then I've also heard kind of the other scale of things with different kind of resources and books like The Human Firm. And I was looking into that about how it doesn't replace human touch. So we're just going to unravel that topic a bit more about ChatGPT, and let's get into a bit more detail about that bit of kit. So, of course, we're probably aware that ChatGPT does hold a lot of promise, and I've definitely seen different ways people have utilized it. So AI typically takes the form of automation, but last year the kind of new part of technology came out, which is this ChatGPT model, and this is what's known as generative AI. Simply put, this just means that AI can generate new content. For example, we can ask ChatGPT or even the Google version Bard via everyday English to write a letter, a poem, even a whole novel. And then I mentioned it earlier, technologies like Midjourney do the same for visual art and design. We provide them the prompt, and then it's going to create it for us. So again, I've seen people use that for logos or marketing resources, things like that. So these are all more examples of machine learning, albeit it very evolved. It's just a whole new level using massive amounts of data to train the machine learning. ChatGPT and Bard, I've got to give that an honorable mention as well. They're essentially trained on the entire internet. And example, like libraries of books, that's basically what they are. So as such, it's worth remembering that these tools aren't actually intelligent. So just like with AutoEntry, they're using that same weighting technique to tell us the most likely output. But ChatGPT is very similar to predictive text you might also use on your phone. So while you're texting somebody and the phone guesses the next word you're going to type, then of course that's pretty much the same principle. And then, but that's instead of sentences like the predictive text, ChatGPT is more for the whole entire paragraph and doing a bit more of that kind of work. The latest version of ChatGPT, again, I don't think a lot of people are aware of this, is actually ChatGPT 4. So again, it has been around for a bit longer than we all thought, and it's almost certainly driving the creation of new apps and services. And we might not be aware of those apps and services now. They're definitely going to start kicking off in 2024 as that year gets underway. And we're already starting to see it in the US. For example, there's a new service out there called Chat CPA. And what that is, it's a chatbot that answers questions like an accountant would, because it's trained on the text from US tax and company laws. It doesn't work out taxes yet, though. And it's actually aimed more at accountants as a useful lookup tool. It's not there for the clients to then try to do it themselves. So, yeah, don't ever feel like these kind of tools are going to ever replace the services you can offer. As I say, these are just here to kind of aid you along your service and offerings. You can actually access ChatGPT in many different ways. Excuse me. So, for example, if you're using Microsoft's Bing search engine, you can select the chat option there. And that's also available directly in Microsoft Edge. And again, that's also free and accessible. Just click the large B button, I believe it is, at the top right of the window. And then as for if you're using the Google option, so with Google Chrome, just search for it. And again, it will pop up. And it's completely free to use. For accountants and bookkeepers, obviously we want to stay within that journey. There's quite a few things as well, like ChatGPT or Google Bard, that can be used right now. Some examples is, and this is again kind of pieced together from what I've been kind of hearing, what some of my colleagues have been listening to, and again what we've seen online. You can ask ChatGPT for your practice to ask how to write out an email for something that's a difficult topic or something that's very repetitive, and you need to maybe politely but ambiguously remind a client on the 30th of January to send his receipts and invoices for his tax return, you've got the tools to do that with ChatGPT. This is good if English isn't your first language, or if you're not confident in your grammar/spelling skills. But yeah, there is an option there. You can get ChatGPT to create posts about engaging, or social posts for engaging, and something that's a bit more fun and quirky for your clientele. You can ask it questions about taxation legislation, but also just bear in mind you also always want to double check these with your own Google searches afterwards, just because AI doesn't understand what the truth is. It just presents the most likely answer based on what most people think, because most of what it knows comes from what's read online and elsewhere. Other utilizations of ChatGPT I've seen recently as well, I've actually saw someone get it to write a business plan. How they did that was really good. So the example they used was they were asking ChatGPT to write out a business plan for a coffee shop, so a cafe startup, and it allowed the accountant to move forward with their client on more of the advisory piece by utilizing that tool. However, they didn't just use the business plan because it creates it within seconds. It doesn't just automatically allow you to think, right, cool, that's done, we'll move on. What that accountant specifically did was they just used that as their template. And then that allowed them to go in and add in their own expertise, put in their own content, just using that as the base premise of the template. And that saved hours and hours, if not even potentially days of work. And that was by using the generative AI to get the ball rolling on that business plan. Again, I'm not kind of mentioned that I wouldn't go back to it, but let's talk about the recruitment crisis again. You can also use ChatGPT to kind of create detailed job adverts. It's probably one of the more mundane tasks I think people have kind of mentioned in the past, writing those out. But you can just be specific with what you require, and again, get it to write out the job detail description, and then that's going to set the premise and the template for you to use to then go in and maybe add on additional requirements for you, maybe even a bit more about why you're the right place to work or whatever the scenario. And then lastly, just on this topic here, again, another utilization piece for ChatGPT. I've seen people use it to create a quiz. So they might use that as a quiz to help train internal staff, or just do a bit of a knowledge check, because you can quiz it on basically VAT rules, for example, and then just have it kind of write out the answers. You take the questions, you take out the answers, or if you already know them and test yourself, perfect. And then you can use that for any kind of junior employees or any senior ones, as I say, just to do that knowledge-based check. So that's just another way people have utilized it within their practice. Once again, you can see from my examples that AI is being used to augment humans rather than replace them. I think that's a really key point I'm going to keep referring back to. So treat ChatGPT essentially as a very young, inexperienced assistant, not an accountant. Assistant is the key word there, who's very keen to sound like they know what they're talking about, but actually they still have a lot to learn. You can most certainly hand off tasks to it, but be aware that you will always have to, and do encourage you, always double check what it is creating. Because ChatGPT, Google Bard, they don't actually understand what they're saying, remember? So you shouldn't forget that. So let's try and pull, again, we're just going to do another bit of a recap. Let's kind of pull what we've learned so far and then move that into a solid strategy moving forward. Firstly, don't sweat the details. We've gone into a lot of technical details today, I do appreciate, but there's no need for you to have kind of every kind of aspect of technical knowledge about AI by any means. Because as we mentioned, AI is likely to be subtle, it's invisible, and works largely in the background. For example, AutoEntry, we never actually really mention machine learning in any of our marketing campaigns or even within the app itself if you're using it, because it's about focusing on the outcome. And then that way it changes how people work. And that's what you should focus on too. AI is likely to be referred to as something like next-gen automation in most cases. Secondly, be aware that it's still very early days for artificial intelligence. Even though I did kind of showcase the history earlier, it's still very much ever evolving, very early days into what the potential outcome could be. Things like ChatGPT and just general generative AI tools that are hitting the market today, they've essentially been cobbled together to take advantage of the hype. It's going to be maybe, I'd probably say, and this has been a common kind of opinion from kind of other kind of technical aspects, probably maybe a year or two before we see solid apps and services reach the market that are simply more clever demonstrations of the technology, of what it can actually produce, than what is just known as generative AI today. So be aware that artificial intelligence has actually probably become a bit of a buzzword right now. People are very curious about it. And indeed, that's probably why many of you are here today. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there are sure to be apps and services that use the term incorrectly or even deceitfully. So be careful of falling for FOMO, so the fear of missing out. So yeah, don't feel like you need to have absolutely every tool around you. You'll always have these reference points to make sure you know what's right for you and your clients and your practice. Which kind of leads nicely onto the third point, where you should aim to perfect your app stack. Or if you haven't got an app stack yet, it's probably probably a good time for you to start building one, because this is the route to which AI will get into your business, and that's the way it will start changing your processes for the better. To build an app stack, you just need to focus on the low value tasks and processes that eat up most of your time. So find these kind of drudge, mundane tasks that you're kind of doing or your colleagues are doing, and then I can almost guarantee there will probably be an app out there for it. So again, another great example for it is AutoEntry. When you sign up to become an accountant or a bookkeeper, no one kind of really enters the industry to be like, I can't wait to start typing out all of these invoices and receipts. It's just not kind of the premise of the role. But unfortunately, it's a factor that we have to adhere to. So it's a mundane task typing out that info. So by using AutoEntry, it cuts out that. So that's kind of one of the foundation stones of any app stack beyond the accounting app within itself. As I say, there'll be other kind of scenarios, other mundane tasks, which you'll be able to find other solutions for. Fourthly, consider which side of the coin the AI is going to help with. I will explain the coin here as well. So how's it going to help process things for you as the practice? And also, how's it going to help your clients as well? A good example is Futurely. And I briefly mentioned it earlier about kind of the reporting and forecasting software. But that can be built into new service offerings where you provide advisory services for your clients who wouldn't like to have a 3-year projection of their finances. On the other hand, something like AutoEntry can help your own processes when it comes to tasks like compliance and tax return preparation, although it can also help your clients if they're used to get the data to you in a neat digital format. And then the last point here, keep your ear close to the ground. I mean, there's so many resources out there allowing you to listen to accounting influencers on social media, websites like Accounting Web, and influencers as well. You probably see a lot of like James Asher, the Go Proposal, Sage's own Chris Downing. They're putting out regular posts about the governing body. And then, so it's more about kind of finding out what useful apps and services are. And then from that, you can take it a step further and actually start trialing out these kind of solutions and giving them a go for yourself. And then the very, very last part here is let's just kind of test and measure everything. As I say, these apps and tools that I've referenced, including AutoEntry, they're free to trial. 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to have access to it, give it a go, kind of measure the KPIs and ROI for you, because you want to make sure it's going to provide you and your practice and your clients value. If you're using timesheets still, then you have a very clear metric by which you can judge if an app is actually reducing the time spent on a task or process and use the available data and measure. But that is predominantly it. That point there, I was going to go through about AutoEntry, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give a very kind of surface level overview into how AutoEntry works. And that in hand will explain what that last slide was. There's no point in having this repetitive process. So what we're going to look at now, just because I mentioned it a lot, and I just think it's always going to be worth kind of having a surface level look, is what AutoEntry is and how it's utilized for practices and for your clients. The end game here is to kind of eliminate manual data entry, as I've referenced already. So things you're typing out, invoices, receipts, bank, credit card statements, we can skip that process by uploading the data into AutoEntry, but we can also get our clients to upload it in on our behalf via email, the mobile phone app, or scanning and dragging and dropping it in. What AutoEntry then does is we'll capture the numbers and letters from the document. As I say, the software is taught the meaning behind what it's extracted. So then from there, we can start using the AI to speed up that process, showing you what data it's extracted here in the inbox. And we can start teaching the software more about what we're going to be using in the future. Because we've extracted here the date, supplier names, and our totals, of course. But what we want to start doing here in these 3 columns is, because we're connected into Sage in this scenario, with that information that's pulled through. So this now allows me to tell for future references that this supplier will always kind of have invoices for this nominal code. And if I just make that one change, that's where artificial intelligence comes in. It's asking here, do I want that to be remembered? So it's going to automate that task for me next time. And then a click of a button, it's now going to feed it straight into my accounting software. It also does a bit more capability within that. As I say, this is very surface level for today. We can kind of capture information for, as I say, the other documents. And again, it will kind of help cut out that time saving for you. So yeah, that's where the machine learning is. We've also got the ability to archive everything. So again, it's all about that online storage and making that data easily accessible for you and the client. Furthermore, with the artificial intelligence in AutoEntry, you do have the capacity here as well to reconcile it alongside supplier statements to find any of those missing invoices perhaps on those clients. You can then also use it to calculate any missing pages from a bank statement or a credit card statement, as well as kind of set your clients here through an approval process for their personal individual employee expenses. So that's kind of where artificial intelligence is currently being used in AutoEntry. As I said, I don't want to go too much into that at this stage, but it's just about making you aware that it is there. And then lastly, I just want to finish up one more poll because, as I said, I just kind of showed you brief highlights of what artificial intelligence looks like within AutoEntry. If you are interested in having a personal one-to-one demo, actually going into the detail of seeing how much more it can automate for your practice, then we've got this poll up on the page now. Feel free to answer those there. Don't worry if you're not ready at this stage, because I appreciate Rome wasn't built in a day, and that can be referenced back to building your brand new app stack. So yeah, I'll just leave this for a couple of minutes just in case anyone wants to kind of utilize that, and we can then reach out and book in the time for you that's suitable. And then what we'll do now, we'll wrap up with a Q&A just to end the session. Cool. So there's a couple of people there. If you have said you wanted to look at AutoEntry, don't worry, we'll reach out and we can arrange that. For those who said maybe, you'll also have an email of this information sent to you in this webinar with a bit more of the notes as well, so you can reference back. And then also here on the screen, we do have QR codes if it's easier for you to either set up a free trial, or you can just be book yourself straight in for a time that's convenient to you. So what I'm going to do now is I don't have too much else to kind of reference at this point now. So as I say, the floor is open to yourselves. We have the Q&A session. My colleague Keir is in there as well. So what we can do is kind of answer any kind of queries that have popped up. So let me just adjust this. There we go.
Rory, thank you very much for that. That was a fascinating presentation. We've got some questions come in, and we've got about 5 or 6 minutes in which we can put them to you. A quick one, which I think you may have touched on in the demo just there, which was, could you explain how AutoEntry works between the accountant and the client? Does the client have to use AutoEntry, have it on their desktop?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think a lot of people, they don't know. Some clients can use it directly if you wish, but accountants can use it to just kind of help organize their client as well. So it can be used in both scenarios.
Okay, let's move on to another question then. We mentioned paperwork right at the top of the presentation and how it recognizes entries on paperwork. Is there any limit to the paperwork? AutoEntry or AI in general can identify and categorize?
No. So we're kind of predominantly, so with AutoEntry, it's focusing on invoices, receipts, statements. So that's kind of what we're categorizing here in this stage. But if you're using kind of other tools for things like letters of engagement or even creating proposals, things like that, that's kind of where AI comes in as well. So there isn't essentially a limit, and it's still using that generative AI it's still going to continue to adopt, evolve, and learn. So essentially, it's unlimited at this stage.
A quick question about its versatility. Does AutoEntry work with Xero and not just Sage?
Yes. So going back to kind of one of the previous mentions there, so AutoEntry works alongside many different apps. So Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, Free Agent Cashflow. There's a whole host, as well as CSV export as well. And I think you'll find a lot of accounting tools these days outside of data entry also offer the same agnostic solutions.
Another question on how it compares. How does AutoEntry compare to HubDoc?
It's a really common question. It's probably a daily question. AutoEntry is very much about kind of going into a bit more detail. HubDoc's amazing for just capturing those kind of totals, and that's what it's great for. And if those clients are using Xero, 100%, HubDoc's something definitely worth looking at because it is included with it. AutoEntry is more for about going into kind of automating that kind of nominal code process, automated line item capture, as well as kind of helping with the reconciliation process too. So it's about more detail to summarize.
If AutoEntry is capturing documents that are necessary for compliance with HMRC, do clients need to retain paper copies?
No, because our archive facility is HMRC compliant, so we do store it for a minimum of 7 years. However, what it's also then going to do is it will transfer the digital record within AutoEntry into your accounting software. So essentially, it's creating a backup, which again is going to kind of bolster you up for when MTD does eventually come in. So you've got kind of 2 digital records to help you go paperless.
I'm going to ask this last question, even though I'm not sure the abbreviations. I'm hoping you will be, Rory. Can you split a receipt in 2 NCs?
Yes, you can. Nominal capture, I'm assuming it is the NC there. But yes, you can kind of separate the receipt. If that wasn't the kind of the terminology NC was referenced to, I'm more than happy to, if you come over to the website, there's a chat box there, you can ask it there, or you can contact myself directly and we can utilize that. But yeah, receipts can be split out.
Okay. Rory, I think that exhausts our questions for today. I hate to break things up, but we're running out of time and I need to bring things to a close. I hope you found today's webinar useful and enjoyable for you, Rory. It just remains for me to thank Rory McMahon. Thank you, Rory, for being here.
Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for attending. And yeah.
And lastly, thanks to everyone who's tuned in, logged in today to listen to Rory speak about AI and AutoEntry. Thank you and goodbye.